Marcus was only 12 years old, and most days he walked home from school by himself. He carried a backpack that was a little too heavy for his shoulders, but he never complained. His father had taught him that complaining made the load feel heavier, while courage made it lighter. That afternoon, the sun was shining, the street was busy with people, and Marcus walked along the same route he always took. His thoughts were on his homework, and the fact that his best friend had promised to come over later to play basketball. It felt like an ordinary day. As Marcus passed a small corner store, something unusual caught his eye. Right near the entrance, on the sidewalk, lay a wallet. It was brown leather, slightly worn but thick enough that anyone could tell it held money and cards inside. Marcus looked around. People were walking by, some talking on their phones, some too busy to notice. He bent down and picked up the wallet, carefully. For a moment he thought about his father's words, the lesson he had heard many times. Marcus, when you see something that is not yours, you return it. That's called integrity. Even when no one is watching, you do the right thing. Marcus held the wallet in both hands, looked around again, and decided he would give it to the store clerk. He pushed open the glass door, the small bell above, it jingling. Inside, the smell of bread and coffee filled the air. He walked up to the counter and held out the wallet. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said politely. "I just found this outside your store. Maybe it belongs to someone who was here." The man behind the counter, a middle-aged clerk who looked tired from a long day, blinked in surprise. Before he could answer, a woman near the counter gasped and said loudly, "That boy has a wallet. Did he just take it?" The words cut through the store like a sharp sound. Heads turned. A few people near. The door glanced at Marcus suspiciously. One man muttered, "Kids these days, always stealing." Marcus's heart started beating faster. No, Marcus said quickly, his small voice shaking. "I didn't steal it. I found it outside, right there by the door. I was just giving it to him." He pointed to the clerk, still holding the wallet out with both hands. But doubt had already spread like fire. The woman shook her head as if she didn't believe a single word. Another man near the shelves laughed softly, muttering something about lying kids. Then the situation escalated. A police officer who happened to be near the block had walked in, probably responding to the call about a wallet. He was tall, wearing dark glasses, his uniform crisp and neat. He looked at Marcus and then at the wallet. "What's going on here?" the officer asked firmly. The woman wasted no time. "This boy was caught with a wallet. Says he just found it. I think he's lying." The officer walked closer to Marcus, towering over him. "Is that true? Did you take it, kid?" Marcus shook his head quickly. "No, sir, I didn't take it. I saw it on the ground outside. I was just bringing it in." The officer folded his arms and tilted his head, clearly not convinced. "Stop lying," he said in a sharp tone. "You think I haven't heard that excuse before? Kids always say the same thing." Marcus felt a sting in his chest. Not from the words alone, but from the way everyone around was starting to laugh or smirk. A few people whispered, and he could hear bits of their conversations. "Probably up to no good. Look at him pretending. Bet he spends that money quick." If no one saw him, he wanted to disappear, but he stood his ground. His father's lessons echoed in his ears. When you tell the truth, stand by it, even if nobody believes you. "I'm not lying," Marcus said, his voice steadier this time. "My dad taught me never to steal. He's in the special forces. He taught me to respect other people's things." The words were out before he even thought about them. It was the truth, simple as that. But instead of convincing the officer, it only brought more laughter. The officer chuckled, shaking his head. "Special forces, your dad? Kid, don't make up stories. You're just digging yourself deeper." "Where is this so-called soldier dad of yours?" People around the store laughed louder now. One man slapped his thigh as if it were the funniest joke he had ever heard. Another woman shook her head in pity. "Poor kid. Lying about his father now," she muttered. Marcus's cheeks grew hot, but he clenched his fists at his side. "I'm not making it up," he said firmly. My dad is a special forces soldier. He's not here right now, but he always comes when I need him. The officer leaned closer, smirking. Sure, kid, and maybe he's a superhero too, right? Stop lying or I'll take you to the station. Marcus swallowed hard. Fear crept in, but so did determination. He remembered the long talks with his dad during quiet evenings, the stories about bravery, not giving in to fear, and the importance of truth. His father's deep voice echoed again in his mind. Son, people may laugh at you, they may call you names, but if you are telling the truth, you stand tall. The truth doesn't need approval. It just is. So Marcus lifted his chin slightly and met the officer's eyes. I'm telling the truth, he said. His voice was calm this time without panic. You can laugh if you want. Everyone can laugh. But my dad will come. He always comes. The store went quiet for a moment after that, the laughter softening into uneasy silence. The boy's confidence didn't match his size, and even the officer looked momentarily taken aback. For a child to stand there, surrounded by suspicion and mockery, and still hold firm, that took strength. The officer straightened up and tried to regain his authority. We'll see about that, he muttered, though his voice wasn't as sharp as before. He reached for the wallet and Marcus handed it over without hesitation, glad to be rid of the weight of it. The crowd still whispered, some still smirking, but something about the boy's calm words lingered in the air. Marcus, though his heart was pounding, stood quietly by the counter. He didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't run. He just waited. Outside, the sound of an approaching engine began to hum down the street. A black SUV slowed near the corner, its presence unnoticed by most of the crowd. Marcus glanced up, a small spark of hope flickering in his eyes. He knew that sound. He knew that car. Inside the store, however, the officer still shook his head, muttering under his breath. Special Forces Dad. What a story. But Marcus stayed calm. Deep inside, he knew he wouldn't have to wait long. Marcus stood quietly near the counter, his small hands still trembling even though the wallet was no longer in them. The police officer held it now, flipping it open as if to prove something. The officer's lips curved into a smirk as he pulled out a few bills and cards, shaking his head. A fat wallet like this and you expect me to believe you didn't want to keep it for yourself? Stop lying, kid. The words cut Marcus deeply, but he didn't flinch. He had already said the truth, and saying it again wouldn't change the way people laughed at him. Around the store, murmurs and chuckles grew louder. Some of the customers had no sympathy at all. One man leaned on the counter, grinning at Marcus. You kids always got excuses. My nephew did the same thing once, said he found something he actually stole. You're no different. Marcus turned to the man, his young voice steady. I'm not like your nephew, sir. I didn't steal anything. But the man just laughed and looked at the officer as if enjoying the show. See, officer? He's got all the lines ready. You better take him in before he makes up another story. The officer crossed his arms and stared at Marcus again. You said your dad is in the special forces, huh? That's the funniest thing I've heard all week. What kind of soldier lets his kid wander around lying and stealing? Tell me, kid, where is this soldier dad of yours? The question echoed across the store, and before Marcus could even answer, some of the bystanders burst into laughter. A young woman shook her head and whispered to her friend, Special Forces? He probably saw that in a movie. Another man added, if his dad was really a soldier, he wouldn't be here in the first place. He'd be in some big house not sending his boy to run errands. Marcus clenched his fists tightly at his side, his nails pressing into his palms. He wanted to shout, to tell them all how wrong they were, but he remembered his father's teachings. Never lose control. His dad had once told him, a strong man doesn't need to scream to be heard. Truth speaks for itself. So Marcus simply repeated, calm but firm, my dad is in the special forces. He taught me never to lie. He taught me to return what isn't mine. The officer leaned down, his face close to Marcus's, and said loudly, enough for everyone to hear. Stop lying, boy. Your dad isn't coming, you're just making up stories to save yourself. The crowd roared with laughter again, some shaking their heads, others mocking Marcus under their breath. Marcus's cheeks burned, but his eyes stayed locked on the officers. "He will come," he whispered, his voice quiet but certain. The officer frowned, annoyed by Marcus's calmness. "Enough of this. Come with me. We'll sort this out." "At the station." He grabbed Marcus lightly by the arm, trying to lead him toward the door. Marcus didn't resist, but his steps were heavy and his eyes kept looking outside as if expecting something. The clerk behind the counter, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. "Officer, maybe the boy really did find it. He gave it to me right away before you came." But the woman who had accused Marcus first snapped back. "Oh, please, he's just saying that now because he feels sorry for the boy. Don't fall for it." The officer nodded at her words, ignoring the clerk's attempt to defend Marcus. "I've seen too many kids like this. They always say they're innocent. They always pretend their parents are somebody important. Next thing you know, they're out on the street again doing the same thing." The laughter quieted down for a moment as Marcus spoke again, louder this time so everyone could hear. "I'm not pretending. My dad is a soldier, he's brave and honest, and he told me to be the same. You don't have to believe me. But I'm not lying." There was something about the boy's tone, so firm, so unshaken, that silenced a few people in the store, but others still rolled their eyes. The young woman whispered again, "He's stubborn. Probably thinks if he keeps repeating it, someone will believe him." The officer smirked. "All right, kid. If your dad is such a big soldier, where is he? Why isn't he here? Why isn't he protecting you now?" Marcus looked straight into the officer's eyes and answered without hesitation. "Because he trusts me to do the right thing on my own. But if I really need him, he'll be here. He always comes." The words hung in the air, bold and unshaken. Some of the customers exchanged glances, suddenly unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. The officer, though, barked out a laugh. "You hear that, folks? His dad always comes. Sounds like a fairy tale to me." People chuckled again, but not as loudly as before. Something in Marcus's calmness was unsettling them. The boy wasn't crying. He wasn't begging. He wasn't even trying to escape. He just stood there with quiet strength, repeating his truth. The officer tugged Marcus toward the door again. "Come on, let's go." Marcus's shoes scraped against the floor as he walked. The bright afternoon light shone through the glass door, and for a brief moment he thought of his father's face. Calm, strong, reassuring. His father had promised him that no matter where he was, no matter how hard things got, he would never let Marcus face the world alone. Outside, the street buzzed with life. Cars passed by and people strolled along the sidewalks, unaware of the drama inside the store. Marcus's heart pounded, but he didn't lose his faith. He knew his father was near. He knew it the same way he knew the sun would rise the next morning. The officer opened the door and pushed Marcus gently forward. "Let's see how much you keep lying when we get to the station." Marcus lifted his chin slightly, looked at the officer, and said softly, "You'll see. My dad will come." The officer rolled his eyes, but before he could answer, the faint sound of an engine grew louder down the street. A black SUV turned the corner and began moving slowly toward the store. Marcus's heart leapt. He knew that car. Inside the store, some people continued whispering, shaking their heads, thinking Marcus's story was about to fall apart. But Marcus stood a little straighter now, his eyes fixed on the approaching SUV, the quietest smile forming on his lips. The officer noticed the change in his face and frowned. "What are you smiling at, kid?" Marcus looked at him calmly and replied, "You'll see." The black SUV rolled slowly toward the store, its windows dark, its frame shining in the afternoon sun. To the people inside the store, it was just another car on the street. But to Marcus, it meant everything. His eyes lit up, and for the first time since the officer had grabbed his arm, he felt relief. He knew who was inside. He knew he hadn't been abandoned. The officer noticed Marcus staring at the vehicle, his lips curling into that small, certain smile. "What did I tell you, kid? Stop pretending. You think every black car that passes by is your magical soldier dad?" But Marcus didn't even answer this time. He just kept watching, his chest rising and falling as the SUV slowed right in front of the store. The driver's side door opened and out stepped a tall man. He wasn't wearing a uniform, but the way he moved made everyone pause. His back was straight, his shoulders square, and his steps sure. He carried himself with quiet authority, the kind that didn't need loud words or showy gestures. It was David, Marcus's father. For a second, the officer froze. He hadn't expected anyone to appear, let alone a man like this. The bystanders, who had been laughing, grew quiet, some leaning forward to get a better look. The atmosphere shifted instantly, like the room itself knew that something had changed. David's eyes swept over the scene, taking in everything in seconds. The wallet in the officer's hand, his son standing close to the door with a firm face, but tense shoulders, the group of onlookers whispering. Without saying a word, David's presence demanded respect. Marcus felt his throat tighten with pride. "Dad," he said softly, almost like a prayer answered. David stepped closer, his voice calm but deep. "What's going on here?" The officer straightened up quickly, trying to reassert himself. "Sir, this boy was caught with a wallet. He says he found it, but his story doesn't add up. And then he started making up some nonsense about his father being in the special forces." The officer let out a short laugh, glancing at the crowd for support. "I guess now you've come to continue the story." David didn't laugh, he didn't even smile. He looked directly at the officer, his gaze steady and sharp. "That boy is my son." And he wasn't lying. The store fell silent. No one spoke. No one dared laugh now. The officer blinked, caught off guard. "Wait. You're saying—" David reached into his jacket pocket and calmly pulled out a leather case. He opened it and held it up. Inside was his military identification card, official, clear, and undeniable. The officer leaned closer to read, his eyes widening slightly as the words stared back at him. United States Army Special Forces. Decorated service. A murmur spread through the store. People who had mocked Marcus only minutes earlier now exchanged embarrassed glances. The young woman who had whispered that Marcus was making things up bit her lip and lowered her eyes. The man who had compared Marcus to his nephew shifted uncomfortably, suddenly unable to meet David's gaze. The officer's smirk faded completely. He cleared his throat, his voice losing its earlier sharpness. I didn't realize." David slid the ID back into his pocket. His voice was still calm, but there was an edge of steel beneath it. "You didn't realize because you didn't listen. My son told you the truth. But instead of believing him, you mocked him. You made a crowd laugh at him for being honest." The officer shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable under David's steady gaze. "Look, sir, I was just—" "Doing your job?" David interrupted, his tone still level but firm. "Your job is to protect the innocent, to teach people to trust the law. Instead, you embarrassed a child who was doing the right thing." The store clerk, who had been silent after his first attempt to defend Marcus, now spoke up with renewed courage. "It's true. The boy gave me the wallet right away. He didn't try to hide it. He didn't take anything. He was just being honest." Heads in the crowd began nodding. Whispers of guilt spread as people realized they had all been so quick to doubt a child. Some of them looked at Marcus with regret in their eyes. Marcus stood a little taller now. His father was here and the truth was clear. But more than anything, he felt proud that he hadn't backed down, even when everyone had laughed. David turned to Marcus, his face softening. He placed a strong hand on his son's shoulder. "You did the right thing, son. You told the truth even when no one believed you. That's what matters." Marcus's chest swelled with pride. "I remembered what you told me, Dad. That the truth doesn't need anyone to believe it, it's still the truth." David smiled slightly, nodding. "That's right." The officer cleared his throat again, his face red now. "Sir, I owe you both an apology. I shouldn't have doubted your boy. I shouldn't have spoken to him that way." David looked at him, his eyes still calm but piercing. "An apology is a start. But what you really owe him is respect. Because today he stood taller than you did." The words landed heavy in the air. The officer lowered his eyes, nodding slowly. Around the store, people whispered again. this time not with laughter but with shame. Some even clapped quietly as if to acknowledge the boy's courage. The woman who had first accused Marcus stepped forward, her face pale. I'm sorry," she said softly, not quite able to meet Marcus's eyes. "I shouldn't have assumed." Marcus nodded politely, not angry, just relieved. "It's okay," he said. David guided his son toward the door. As they walked past the crowd, people stepped aside quickly, some murmuring words of respect, others just staring silently at the father and son. The same people who had laughed minutes ago now looked at them with admiration. Outside, the sun was still shining. The SUV waited, its engine humming quietly. David opened the door for Marcus and let him climb in. Before getting in himself, he turned back to the officer one last time. "Next time," David said firmly, "when a child tells you the truth, believe him before you mock him. You might learn something about honor." The officer nodded quickly, too ashamed to reply. David got into the SUV and started the engine. As the car pulled away, Marcus leaned back in his seat, finally letting out a breath he had been holding for what felt like forever. His father glanced at him and smiled gently. "You proud of yourself?" David asked. Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah, I didn't give up. I told the truth." David reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder. "That's my boy. That's what makes a soldier, not the uniform, not the medals. It's the courage to do the right thing no matter what." Marcus smiled, his heart swelling with pride. The laughter he had heard earlier no longer mattered. All that mattered was that he had stood firm, and his father had seen it. The black SUV drove down the street, leaving behind a crowd that would remember the lesson for a long time. The boy they had mocked was no liar. He was the son of a soldier, and he had proven that truth, no matter how small the voice, could silence a room full of doubt. The crowd inside the store was still buzzing after David had shown his identification. Whispers moved from person to person, and the once loud laughter had turned into silence, mixed with regret. People looked down at their shoes. Some exchanged guilty glances, and others tried to avoid eye contact altogether. The air had shifted completely. What had started as a scene of mockery was now heavy with respect, tension, and shame. David stood tall, his hand still resting gently on Marcus's shoulder. His presence filled the space without him needing to raise his voice. He wasn't angry in the way most people would expect. There was no shouting, no threats. Instead, his calm tone carried more weight than any yell ever could. The officer still stood awkwardly near the counter, holding the wallet as if it had suddenly become too heavy for him. His earlier confidence had drained away, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead. For the first time that afternoon, he looked unsure of himself. David turned his attention to him. His eyes were steady, and his words were measured. "You wear that badge to protect people, to set an example. Yet today you chose to humiliate a child who is telling you the truth. Do you understand what kind of message that sends?" The officer swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably under the weight of the words. I was only doing my duty, sir. I thought—" "You thought wrong," David interrupted firmly, though his voice never rose. "You thought it was easier to assume the worst of him instead of looking at the facts." He handed the wallet over to the clerk immediately. "That should have told you everything, but instead of rewarding honesty, you tried to crush it." The officer looked down at the wallet, shame clouding his face. The silence in the store was so thick that even the hum of the refrigerator in the corner sounded loud. David continued, his voice steady. "Do you know how much courage it takes for a boy his age to stand in front of adults, in front of a uniformed officer, and still hold on to the truth? You tried to break that, and you made people laugh at him for it. The mo." Words hung in the air, piercing deeper than anger ever could. The customers shifted uneasily. A woman who had laughed earlier lowered her head and wiped at her eyes, ashamed of herself. The man who had compared Marcus to his nephew cleared his throat, but no words came. Marcus stood quietly beside his father, his small chest swelling with pride. For once, it wasn't just his dad protecting him. It felt like his father was protecting the very idea of truth itself. The officer finally spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "You're right, sir. I was wrong. I shouldn't have mocked him. I should have listened. I apologize." David studied him for a long moment before nodding slightly. "An apology is a start. But let me tell you something. When you mock a child for telling the truth, you don't just embarrass him. You teach every other child watching that honesty has no value. You make them afraid to do the right thing. Is that the kind of lesson you want to spread while wearing that uniform?" The officer shook his head quickly. "No, sir. That's not who I want to be." "Then remember this day," David said firmly. "Remember the boy you doubted, because he stood taller than you did." The officer's shoulders slumped. He nodded, unable to argue. The store clerk, emboldened now, spoke up again. "I saw it with my own eyes. This boy didn't hesitate to hand me the wallet, and I stayed quiet when I should have spoken louder. That was my mistake. I should have defended him from the beginning." He looked at Marcus with a soft smile. "I'm sorry, young man. You did the right thing." Marcus gave a small nod. "It's okay, sir." The woman who had first accused Marcus stepped forward slowly. Her face was pale, and her voice shaky. "I judged you without knowing the truth. I thought the worst just because it was easy. I'm sorry too." Other voices followed. One by one, people admitted their guilt. A young woman whispered, "I laughed when I shouldn't have." A man near the door muttered, "I didn't believe you and now I feel ashamed." The air that had been filled with mocking laughter minutes ago was now filled with apologies and quiet remorse. David didn't gloat. He didn't smile triumphantly. He simply nodded at each apology and said, "What matters is that you've learned something today. Don't judge so quickly. Don't laugh at honesty. Because you never know the strength it takes for someone to stand up for what's right." Marcus watched the change around him with wide eyes. It felt almost unreal. Moments ago, he had been surrounded by mocking voices, and now those same people looked at him with respect. His father had turned the entire moment around, not by force but by truth spoken with calm authority. The officer, still holding the wallet, finally turned to the clerk and handed it over. "This belongs in your lost and found. I'll file a report so if the owner comes, they'll know it was kept safe." His tone was different now, measured, careful, humbled. David placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder again. "Son, do you see how quickly people can change when the truth is revealed? They laughed at you when they thought you were weak, but now they respect you because you stood firm." Marcus nodded slowly. "I wasn't sure I could, Dad. But I remembered what you always told me. And I tried." David's eyes softened, pride shining in them. "You did more than try. You succeeded. You showed them what honesty looks like. And you showed them strength doesn't always come from size or power. It comes from character." The officer stepped forward, his voice quieter now. "Young man," he said, looking at Marcus, "I owe you respect. I hope one day, if you ever choose to wear a uniform, you'll do a better job than I did today. Because you've got what it takes." Marcus blinked, surprised, but he nodded politely. "Thank you, sir." The crowd began to disperse slowly, each person carrying the weight of what they had witnessed. Some left in silence. Others paused to give Marcus a nod of respect before stepping outside. The laughter was gone, replaced by something heavier, something more meaningful. As David guided Marcus toward the door, he turned back once more to the officer. "A badge means nothing without integrity. Don't forget that." The officer nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, I won't." Father and son stepped outside, the warm sunlight bathing them as the door closed behind them. For Marcus, the air felt lighter now, the weight of mockery replaced by the pride of standing his ground. He looked up at his father, who gave him a rare smile. "You stood tall today," David said softly. Marcus smiled back, his heart filled with courage. "I just wanted to be like you, Dad." David ruffled his son's hair gently. And you were. Together they walked to the black SUV, leaving behind a lesson the people in that store would never forget. Never laugh at the truth, and never underestimate the strength of someone who stands by it. Malik walked slowly down the quiet street, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened. His heart still beat a little faster than usual, but he could finally breathe. The tension that had filled the air earlier had faded, replaced by a strange mix of relief and awe. As he walked, he thought about his father, Sergeant David Hayes, and how calm, strong, and collected he had been. Malik had seen his father handle tough situations before, but this had been different. This had been personal. This had involved him. And yet his father had not raised his voice or acted aggressively. He had simply shown authority and demanded respect, and in that moment everyone had listened. Malik remembered the officer's face as his father arrived. The smirk had vanished. The laughter from the people nearby had disappeared. There was silence. The officer had tried to remain professional, but there was no hiding the respect that Sergeant Hayes commanded. Malik realized then that authority didn't always come from anger or force. Sometimes it came from confidence, experience, and a clear sense of what was right. His father had not needed to threaten anyone. He had simply stood there, firm and calm, and that had been enough. As Malik continued home, he thought about how this situation could have gone very differently. If his father hadn't arrived, he might have been stuck arguing with the officer, feeling frustrated and helpless. People might have continued to laugh or treat him unfairly. He realized how lucky he was to have someone like his father in his life, someone who could protect him not just physically but also with wisdom and guidance. For the first time, Malik understood that courage wasn't always about fighting. Sometimes it was about standing tall, staying calm, and knowing your worth. When Malik finally reached his front door, his mother was waiting, her eyes wide with concern. "Malik, are you okay?" she asked, rushing forward. Malik nodded quickly. "I'm fine, Mom. Dad came right away and everything's okay now." She looked relieved but also curious, sensing that there was more to the story. Malik hesitated for a moment, then began to explain what had happened. He told her about the officer accusing him unfairly, the people laughing, and how scared he had felt. He spoke about his father's arrival, the way he handled the situation, and how it made everyone stop and listen. As he spoke, Malik noticed a sense of pride growing inside him. He had always admired his father, but hearing the story out loud, reliving the events in detail, made him appreciate him even more. His father had not only protected him, but had also taught him an important lesson about respect, authority, and dignity. Malik felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing that his father's presence had changed the course of the day completely. It had been a moment that Malik would never forget. Later that evening, the family sat together around the dinner table. The conversation was light at first, with jokes and stories about school and friends, but Malik couldn't stop thinking about what had happened earlier. Finally, he turned to his father and asked, "Dad, how do you stay so calm when things get tense like that?" Sergeant Hayes looked at him, his eyes thoughtful. "Malik," he said, "it's not about being calm for yourself. It's about staying calm so you can handle the situation the right way. When you let anger or fear take control, you lose clarity. When you stay steady, you can make the best decisions and protect yourself and others." Malik listened carefully, absorbing every word. He realized that his father's strength was not just physical, it was mental. It was about control, patience, and understanding. It was about knowing how to react, and more importantly, knowing what not to react to. Malik thought about the officer and the people laughing earlier. His father hadn't shouted or tried to embarrass anyone. He had simply made it clear that Malik deserved respect, and that was enough to change the situation completely. Over the next few days, Malik couldn't stop thinking about the incident. At school, he noticed things differently. He saw how people reacted to authority, how they treated others based on assumptions, and how quickly situations could escalate when respect was missing. He remembered the officer and how he had initially dismissed him, But he also remembered how everything changed when his father showed up. Malik felt a sense of responsibility now. He wanted to carry himself with the same calm confidence his father had shown. He wanted to stand up for himself and others when needed, but in a way that was fair, controlled, and respectful. Malik also began to understand the power of reputation. His father's reputation as a Special Forces veteran had commanded respect. But it was not just about the medals or the stories of past missions. It was about how his father carried himself every day, the values he lived by, and the lessons he had taught Malik since he was young. Malik realized that being respected wasn't about demanding it or intimidating others. It was about earning it through integrity, discipline, and actions that matched your words. One afternoon, Malik's friends asked him about the incident. Some of them had heard bits of it and were curious. Malik told the story without exaggeration, focusing on the lessons he had learned rather than the drama. He explained how his father's calm presence had stopped the situation from getting worse and how important it was to stand up for yourself with respect and clarity. His friends listened in silence, impressed not only by the story, but also by Malik's reflection on it. Malik felt proud, not because he had been the center of attention, but because he could share something meaningful that could help others too. As weeks passed, Malik found himself more confident. He noticed that he spoke more clearly when explaining himself, listened more carefully, and approached challenges with a thoughtful mindset. He remembered his father's advice: stay calm, know your worth, and act with integrity. Malik realized that the lessons from that day went far beyond a single encounter with an officer. They were lessons he could carry for life. He began to think about how he could handle difficult situations at school, in friendships, and even in future challenges as he grew older. One evening, Malik sat with his father on the porch looking at the sunset. The air was calm, and the world seemed quiet after the storm of emotions from that day. Malik said, "Dad, I think I understand now. It's not just about being strong or being brave. It's about knowing how to handle things the right way." His father smiled, ruffling Malik's hair gently. "Exactly, Malik. Strength isn't just about muscles or actions. It's about mind, heart, and character. And you're learning that very well." In the end, Malik realized that the experience had changed him. What could have been a moment of fear and humiliation had instead become a lesson in courage, respect, and integrity. He had learned that authority and confidence could protect, guide, and inspire, and that the right presence at the right moment could make all the difference. Malik also understood the importance of family, the lessons parents pass on, and how much a single person's calm, principled action could influence the world around them. Even years later, Malik would think back to that day and remember the silence that fell when his father arrived. He would remember the laughter that stopped, the officer who had to rethink his approach, and the quiet pride that filled him as he realized the lessons he had learned. That day had taught him that respect and integrity were more powerful than fear or anger, and that the way he carried himself could change the course of events. It was a lesson he would carry forever. A lesson that started with a simple walk home and ended with a father showing his son how to face the world with courage, wisdom, and grace. Malik knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he could face them. Not because he was the strongest or the loudest, but because he had learned the true meaning of strength. Staying calm under pressure, knowing your worth, and standing up for yourself and others with integrity. And in that knowledge, he found not only courage but also peace.